Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. It is episode 2538 of The Tom Woods Show, and I have with me a couple of people you are very likely to have heard of, Dave Smith and Walter Block. Dave, you know from Part of the Problem, his wildly successful podcast. He's a stand-up comedian. You've seen him on all kinds of high-profile outlets, Joe Rogan many times, Tucker Carlson, Piers Morgan, and the list goes on and on. And we also have Walter Block, who is a professor of economics at Loyola University, New Orleans, author of, sometimes it seems like every book that's ever been written. He's got a list of, I don't know how many academic articles in economics. How many peer-reviewed articles are you up to now, Walter?
730.
730. So that's a lot. And of course, I think if you are in any way informed about the libertarian world, you are aware of the controversy that has arisen around the subject of Israel, the Middle East, Hamas, etc. And so Walter has been very outspoken in support of Israel against Hamas, and this has led to a lot of back and forth. Maybe not as much back and forth as you would think. A lot of forth, not very much back to Walter. But today we're going to change that because we've got Dave, who is a very high-profile libertarian figure, here to talk back and forth with Walter. And I was telling these two gentlemen I want to be pretty hands-off here. Unless there's too much crosstalk, I'll try to cut that out. Or if somebody keeps interrupting, I'll try to cut that out. But basically, I just want these two people to be able to talk to each other. And so the way we arranged it, we have a more or less a resolution. The resolution being the proper libertarian position is to support Israel in its war with Hamas. Now, it's customary in debates for the person taking the affirmative side to go first, but, no rules can bind us, ladies and gentlemen. So we've decided instead to do it the other way, to let Dave speak first, followed by Walter. So, Dave, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thanks for having me again, Tom, and thank you, Walter, for coming on. So I've done quite a few of these debates on the topic of Israel-Palestine over the last year, and I just recently debated an objectivist for the first time. And this is the first time I'm debating a Rothbardian on the topic. And while there are advantages and disadvantages or costs and benefits to doing these types of debates, one of the things that's interesting to me is that typically I'm going out and I'm debating Democrats or Republicans, and we have, let's just say, wildly different worldviews, and these are statists and collectivists, and it's a little bit different when you're talking to somebody who's a Rothbardian, and at least presumably we're coming from this with a lot of the same foundations. So I would say that number one, to the resolution, it is not only is it not correct that the libertarian position ought to be to support Israel in this war, it is completely incompatible with every single libertarian principle to support Israel in any capacity. Israel is the government owns, I think, close to 90% of the land. They have conscription. They, by any of the standards, if you go back and listen to all of the thousands of episodes of the Tom Woods Show, it's all just different reasons why we could never support an institution like the government of Israel. And that's not even getting into their treatment of the Palestinian people. I would also mention that, let's just say, if you pay attention to the U.S. foreign policy establishment over the last, probably 50 years, but particularly over the last 20 years, let's say with the terror wars, let's just say Israel is a player in that game. I'm not going quite to the lengths that some go to. I'm not saying that Israel completely controls American foreign policy, but they have an oversized influence. And they've certainly been advocating for every single one of the terror wars that we've fought over the last 20 years. And they've been strongly advocating that we fight more, namely against Iran. There's just no getting around the fact that though that is not our team. We are on the team that is against these wars. And anybody whose longest serving prime minister comes over and testifies before our Congress advocating as a regional expert that we go to war with Saddam Hussein, that we go to war to overthrow the regime in Iran, overthrow the regime in Libya, in Syria, and on, is simply something that we shouldn't support. Like, obviously, on the face of it, we oppose the warfare state. And so anybody who's advocating that we continue with it ought to not be supported by us. One of the other major issues that I see, and by the way, I will say that Tom Woods, for people who know my history, I was first introduced to libertarianism by Ron Paul's presidential campaign in 2008. It was actually in 2007 that I first found him. And then it was finding Tom Woods that really converted me to being a libertarian. And you introduced me to Murray Rothbard. And I don't remember where you said this, but I swear it's true, that Tom Woods said, if you're going to read Murray Rothbard, the first two pieces you have to start with are Anatomy of the State and War, Peace, and the State. And I just reread War, Peace, and the State for the first time in years the other day. And I would highly recommend anyone listening to it read it. Just go read that. And it very simply explains why libertarians cannot support what Israel is doing to Gaza right now. You simply don't have a right to. It's you cannot deduce anything from our first principles that will get you to a point where it's okay to slaughter innocent people in the way that they have been. In addition to that, I'd like to make one other point that I think I tried to make in my last debate with the objectivist, and that is just that, and this is why I bring up the peace, war, peace, and the state. For a Rothbardian, like any of the three of us, if we were talking about a local policing matter, and there was somebody who had, committed an act of terrorism and then run into a school to use human shields to hide from them, and the local police department came down and said, all right, we're just going to blow up the school. We would all be appalled by that and opposed to that in the harshest possible language. We would all recognize that for the evil that it is. That people, innocent people, even if they are being held hostage, have natural rights, and you don't have a right to. They don't forfeit their rights because there's a criminal in their vicinity. So when we now are talking about the conflict between Israel and Palestine, those moral rules don't just go away. And I think that this is the foundation of Rothbardianism. Essentially the central foundational claim that Murray Rothbard made was that the moral characteristics of a government are not different just because they're a government. And the rules of morality don't stop applying. And that if a government does something, the moral character of that action is the same as it would be if a group of people did it. After all, government is an artificial social construct. And if I just say I'm the government, that doesn't mean I can go out and behave in a different way, morally speaking, than somebody who's just a private actor. And essentially that leads to the conclusion that governments are criminal organizations. So there's really no way that you can have a completely different standard for how Israel is allowed to treat the Palestinian people versus how we would be allowed to treat a criminal matter within our country without rejecting the core tenets of Rothbardianism. If there is a difference, if there is kind of a micro morality and a macro morality, then that cancels out pretty much everything Murray Rothbard ever said. So I think from the libertarian position, it's all we have to do is read War, Peace, and the State to know what we would support and what we wouldn't support. And in terms of supporting the nation of Israel or the government of Israel, well, just look at their track record. They are the enemies of liberty. They're a criminal organization, and I think that Murray Rothbard had it right. So I'm happy with that as an opening.
All right, Walter.
Thanks for inviting me, Tom, and Dave. Thanks for participating. And I think Dave is absolutely right that the two of us start from the same premises, and we come to I won't call it 180 degrees off, but I'll call it 179 degrees off. We disagree very much, but this is not the only time that this occurs. For example, you can't get two better libertarians than Murray Rothbard and Ron Paul. And they start from the same premises. And yet one is pro-life and the other is pro-choice. And pro-life and pro-choice are not 179 degrees off, they're 180 degrees off. And also on immigration, Hans Hoppe is a sterling libertarian, and so is Bumper Hornberger, and yet they diverge on immigration. Call it 179 degrees there. So it should not occasion any shock or surprise, a gigantic surprise, that yes, Dave and I start from the same place and we come out in opposite directions. Why? Well, we're stupid. Including me and Dave, and all libertarians who disagree. We're confronted with horrendously difficult issues, and our brain power is limited. We're not stupid, but we're not as smart as we'd like to be, and that's probably why we diverge. Now, I agree exactly with Dave when he says Israel owns 90% of the land and has a draft, and therefore is not exactly libertarian. I'm putting it in my own words, but we agree on that. And I think also that Israel is very guilty of U.S. imperialism all over the world, certainly including Iran. So we start off from the same premises. But the way I look at it, it's not how good is Israel. That's not the question. The question is, how good is Israel compared to Hamas? And when you look at it that way, Israel is very, very close to libertarianism, and Hamas is just the very opposite. Dave makes a very good point that here's a murderer who runs into a school, and now what do we do? I want to distinguish that from what Hamas actually does. And the way I'm going to distinguish with that is I'm going to make Tom a Jew, and I'm Hamas. And Tom, you're a dirty Jew, you're a kike, I hate you, you're evil, I'm going to kill you. And I have here a knife. Well, it's a pen, but what the heck, work with me. I have a knife, I'm going to kill you. Tom, not only am I going to kill you, you kike, I'm going to kill your wife and your kids and your parents and your cousins and all your friends that are near you. I'm going to kill you all. And I've got a knife and I'm very powerful. You happen to have a gun. And I have 3 children strapped to the front of me. Here's a rabbit, here's a pig, and here is a trophy that I once won in a competitive race walking race, and I've got them all strapped to the front of me. There they are. And I'm going to come kill you because you're a vermin who Hitler started in on the right path, but he didn't finish the job. I'm going to finish the job. I'm going to get you. The only way you can stop me is to shoot me. And if you shoot me, you'll necessarily get these 3 innocent people. If you don't shoot me, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill your whole family. What do you do? What do you do as a libertarian? Well, to me, the essence of libertarianism is 2 principles, and I'm sure Dave and Tom would agree with me. The 2 principles are the non-aggression principle and private property rights based on homesteading. Those are our principles. We all agree. No divergence there. Well, Tom, you going to shoot me or not? Well, if you don't shoot me, libertarian is not a suicide pact. You don't have to worry about these 3 innocent people. Why? Because I have this thing called negative homesteading. Now, I've written 3 or 4 articles on negative homesteading. We all know what positive homesteading is. You mix your labor with land and you own it. What's negative homesteading? Negative homesteading is I now have a wristwatch and lightning hits me. And with this lightning and with this wristwatch, I can pawn it off onto Dave. Am I allowed to do that? No. I have to keep the misery. I've homesteaded the misery. I got to keep the misery. I can't pawn it over onto Dave because that would violate the non-aggression principle. Namely, I'm the first recipient of the misery, and I got to keep the misery. I can't give it to somebody else, even if I have the ability with my magic wristwatch. Well, these people here are the first homesteaders of the misery. I captured them. How did I do it? Well, I put my rocket launchers in mosques. I put my ammunition in schools. I put it in hospitals. And then I start launching rockets at Israel. And when Israel bombs me back, I give them this argument about murderers running into schools that they just gave. No, I reject that. I think that Tom has every right to shoot me. And the only way he's going to shoot me is through these innocent people that I captured. These are my 3 children, let's say. There's a wonderful cartoon where there's a Hamas guy who says, death to all Jews. And he's got his little baby on his lap. And the baby's got dynamite around him to indicate suicide bombing. And then Netanyahu is sitting there. And the guy from the UN says, can't you meet him halfway? No, you don't meet him halfway. They want to kill all the Jews. And the way they kill all the Jews is first they give a shield of their own people. And then they say, in effect, it's illicit, and Dave buys this. And Dave says, well, it's like the running into a school. No, it's different. It's different. It's very different. Yes, because the murderer who ran into a school is not capturing them. There's a disanalogy. There's a difference between what Hamas is doing and what Dave is ascribing them to do. It's a gigantic difference. It's a 180-degree difference. No, Tom, the Jew, has a right to defend himself and his family. And if it means shooting people that Hamas has captured and puts them in front of them, then they're justified in doing it. Now, some people say, well, it's proportionality. The Hamas only killed 1,200 people on October 7th, and Israel has now killed, the latest figure, I think, is 40,000. And this is vastly disproportionate. Well, I don't buy into that. I think that proportionality is good for punishment. As a Rothbardian, if you steal bubble gum, it's less of a crime than rape, and rape is less of a crime than murder, and the punishment should fit the crime, and now you have proportionality. But self-defense, I don't think proportionality rises. Israel has a right to defend itself, and Hamas is still sending over rockets and is still got 100 captives, hostages. And while this is true, Israel has a right to go and hunt down every Hamas fighter. And if the fighters hide behind their own children, too bad for the children and too bad for Hamas. Golda Meir, former prime minister of Israel, once said, peace will come when, this is just a paraphrase, I can't do justice, she said it beautifully, peace will come when the Palestinians or the Hamasians love their children more than they hate us. Right now, they hate us more than they love their children. So they put their children as shields. Can anything more despicable than that be possible to conceive? I don't think so. So while I agree with Dave that Israel is not a libertarian society, and Israel has got all sorts of problems from a libertarian point of view, I'd be the first to admit that. But the real issue is not how good is Israel from a libertarian point of view. From a libertarian point of view, look, we have 2 boxers, and or maybe we have 2 gymnasts, and both gymnasts are imperfect. No gymnast is ever perfect. And it's our job as referee of the gymnastics is to pick the better one. So it's no good to say, well, gymnast A is imperfect, therefore we're against A. No, you have to say, here's A, here's B, which is closer to perfection. Well, which is closer to perfection? Israel is closer to libertarian perfection. Now, just a word about Murray. Dave read some recent pieces of Murray. I just read For New Liberty, and I read the chapter on war. And Murray says, libertarians are against war, period. And that's an exact quote. No, that's not right. Murray is wrong. Look, just because we're Rothbardians doesn't mean we have to agree with everything that Murray ever said. And Murray contradicted himself. He favored the war of the South against the North in 1861, and he favored the war of the 13 colonies against Great Britain in 1776. The proper libertarian position is not anti-war. Antiwar.com, an amazingly good libertarian organization, is wrong. That title is wrong. Lou Rockwell says they're, anti-war, free enterprise or something like that. That's wrong. We libertarians are not anti-war. Anti-war is pacifism. We libertarians are anti-offensive war. But we're not anti-defensive war. Look, the NBA is going to be starting up soon. And when the other team has the ball, everyone yells defense, defense. They can distinguish between defense and offense. We have to distinguish between defense and offense. Well, who's on the defense and who's on the offense? Hamas is on the offense. Hamas is engaged in genocide. What's genocide? Genocide is when you aim at civilians. Israel doesn't aim at civilians. Israel aims at Hamas fighters, and it gets civilians because it's collateral damage, and they have to do that. In every war, there's always collateral damage. Israel is justified in fighting a war because look at what they did on October 7th. They aimed at civilians. That is genocide, and then they've been sending over bombs forever. I'll end with a quote from Bibi Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu said, if we put down our arms, there'll be no more Israel. If Hamas puts down its arms, there'll be peace.
Hey everybody, Clown World is getting crazier and more deranged and dangerous every single day. And if by now you're not at least thinking about your plan B, I think you're making a big mistake. Well, I'm proud to be presenting at the Expat Money Summit, the world's largest offshore event, taking place entirely online from October 7th to 11th. It's put on by our old friend Mikkel Thorup, multiple-time Tom Woods Show guest and host of the Expat Money Show. He is a highly sought-after expat consultant with over 2 decades of experience, and honestly, Mikkel is one of the most impressive people I know, and trust me, that's saying something. Discover why international diversification is a must for those looking to preserve their liberty and wealth. They are coming for the productive people. There's never been a more urgent time to develop that Plan B, and here's where you can learn everything you need to know about crafting your perfect Plan B, how to quickly acquire a second passport, diversify your finances offshore, invest in international real estate, and get in-depth insights on geopolitics from world-renowned experts. You will recognize some of the headline speakers, who include Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Scott Horton, me, Mark Faber, and many others. To reserve your complimentary ticket, head over to expatmoneysummit.com. That's expatmoneysummit.com. Okay, Dave, you can respond to Walter.
Okay. Well, where to start? It's bizarre to me to hear you citing these government propagandists as if what they're saying is anything other than just the state propaganda line, and Benjamin Netanyahu particularly. All right. So let me just, a few things here, okay? Because you said a lot, and I want to quickly try to respond to as much of it as I can. So first off, when you started there talking about how, look, libertarians do have disagreements about immigration, about abortion, about children's rights, there's lots of issues that libertarians do have disagreements about. However, there's also lots of issues that we just don't have disagreements about. And if somebody were to come out and say, I love socialism and gun control, I don't know that they should be at the Mises Institute anymore. You know what I mean? And you could sit there and say, well, hey, how come we can disagree about immigration, but we can't disagree about socialism and gun control? And it's like, because there's just no libertarian justification for those two. And it's everything we're against. And I got to say, likewise, that's what's going on with this war here. There is, Walter is attempting one, but I just don't think any of it follows. Look, you can say that my analogy was disanalogous, but yours is the one that really fails here. Nobody is saying, if Hamas fighters had broken into Israel on October 7th with 3 babies strapped to them and just been gunning at people, and the IDF had gunned back at them and killed the babies in the process, you wouldn't be hearing anything from me, or I don't think any other libertarians, about how this is aggression. Yes, in that example, you're clearly defending yourself. The fire's coming at you, and if there's babies in the way, hey, you got to defend yourself. However, let's just say someone breaks into my house, shoots at me, maybe even kills a few people in my house, then runs away. Then I use an AI program called Where's Daddy to locate them back to their house where they are with their wife and 3 small children. And then I decide to bomb that house, kill all of them, not at the point that they're firing rockets at me, not at the point that they're shooting bullets at me. After that's happened, just because I want revenge against those people, or I want to kill the bad guy, that is by any definition, an act of aggression. If an individual were to do that, they would be prosecuted for murder in the first degree. It's not self-defense. So whatever analogy you want to find that actually describes the vast amount of killing that's happening in Gaza right now, none of them are this scenario where somebody is shooting at you, you've got a gun to your head, and you have no choice but to either defend yourself or you're going to die. That's not the situation. The situation is that they're leveling entire cities and killing people by the tens of thousands. I mean, I'm not going to get into exactly what the numbers are. None of us exactly know for sure. But you could look at the number of bombs that have been dropped, the population density, and some of the images out of there to know a lot of innocent people have been killed. And that's an act of aggression. I mean, this is very clearly an act of aggression to kill innocent people who had nothing to do with October 7th. And it doesn't matter who they politically support either. That's like weird Osama bin Laden logic that those people like lose their rights somehow. As far as Netanyahu's claim that if Israel were to put down their weapons, the Jews would all be killed. But if the Palestinians were to put down their weapons, there would be peace. Look, this is like such a useless propaganda line from a corrupt politician. But I mean, of course, we're never going to get to a. First off, I wouldn't advise that Israel put down their weapons. But we're never going to get to a world where there's zero weapons on the other sides. I think it was Harry Brown's old line about how the federal government can't even keep drugs out of federal prison. But we can't even keep weapons out of prisons. So it doesn't matter there's always going to be some degree of weaponry. But if you zoom out and look at it and say, well, what if the Palestinians were totally defeated and Israel had all of the power within reason? We've seen what happens with that. Israel is 100,000 times more powerful than the Palestinians, and that's why they've dominated them since before the creation of the state of Israel. And so we see what actually happens when the Palestinians essentially are toothless. And what happens is they get subjugated forever. The status quo is supposed to continue forever. And that is Benjamin Netanyahu's plan, that they will never get their own state. They will never get their independence. They are subjects of Israel and have been since 1967. And again, this is just from any libertarian starting point. If it's homesteading and property rights, well, then Israel has violated the property rights of the Palestinians since before the creation of the state of Israel. And if you're talking about the non-aggression principle, then clearly my analogy is much closer to being accurate here. It's not, we would never accept if I got mugged or beat up by a black guy in Chicago, we would never accept that now I get to just slaughter black people in Chicago. We get to just start bombing them because a crime was committed. And if you're a Rothbardian, if you're a libertarian, then that logic should apply to bigger groups also.
I guess it's my turn.
Yep. Go ahead.
Tom was worried that we'd interrupt each other. I'm glad we're having a civil conversation. I expected nothing else. And I want to compliment Dave. There are people who are cowards who will not debate me. Hans Hoppe, Tom DiLorenzo, Ryan McMakin, Michael Rechtenwald. They take pot shots at me and they refuse to debate me. They refuse to even respond to me. I find that despicable and cowardly, and I'm glad that Dave Smith is not like that. There is such a thing in libertarian theory called a continuum. What's a continuum? A continuum means that you can't deduce anything from libertarian theory. For example, statutory rape law. We know that if you go to bed with a 5-year-old girl, you're a statutory rapist. We don't care that she agreed. We don't think she's capable of any such a thing. We know that if you go to bed with a 25-year-old woman, whatever you are, you're not a statutory rapist, because we think that 25-year-old women are mature enough to agree to go to bed with you or not. Well, where do you draw the line? 16, 18, 17, 14, 19. You can't deduce, you can't say, well, it's 17 years old. 17 is reasonable. I wouldn't object to 17, but you can't deduce it from the non-aggression principle. I'm now going to punch Tom. He's in Florida. I'm in New Orleans. We're friends. He knows I'm never going to do anything like that. But if I get closer and closer to him and the light glints off my wristwatch and it's in a dark alley, then he can shoot me in self-defense. Where do you draw the line? You can't deduce anything like that from libertarian theory. You have to have a jury of your peers to decide. That's what Dave is trying to do here. He's trying to pull the continuum on me. I started out with people like this in front of me, and Dave agrees. Dave agrees with me over here. And his first attempt to undermine this is a murderer runs into a school. That didn't work too well. And then he gets closer in the continuum and he says, well, the murderer goes back to his own home. And then he tries again. He says blacks in Chicago. And I admire Dave's attempt. I admire his brain power. I think that what he's doing is very good from his side. But I can't allow that to occur because it's as if we're on, because what's happening in actuality is this. No, he's right. No, Hamas came with babies and started shooting on October 7th. Fair enough. But that's what they're doing. They are shooting rocket launches from hospitals. They are putting rocket launchers in the middle of mosques, in the middle of residential areas. And then Israel, what is Israel supposed to do? Are they supposed to be pacifists? Are they supposed to commit suicide? Are they supposed to say, because Hamas has innocent Gazans in its power, they shouldn't do anything? That seems to be the logical implication of what Dave is saying. And Dave, you can't say that. You can't say that Israel shouldn't be able to do anything like that. Yes, they're pulverizing a lot of houses. You know why they're pulverizing a lot of houses? Because the Hamas put booby traps in there. And I think something like 1,000 Israeli soldiers have already died. Why have they died? Because they're trying to reduce the deaths of civilians. Israel is a civilized country. They drop leaflets. Hamas doesn't drop any leaflets. They put booby traps in these houses. Then he talks about Hamas. Look, I don't understand this thing about weapons in prisons. I just don't get that. Bibi Netanyahu is an imperfect person. And by the way, I'm honored that he wrote a foreword to my book, my book in 2021 with Alan Fuderman. I'm just happy to be associated with him in that regard. Yes, if Israel put down their weapons, there'd be no more Israel and no more Jews. Why? Because do you know what's in the Hamas convention or the Hamas constitution? Kill all Jews. And not just the ones in Israel, the ones anywhere. Kill them all. They've promised many October 7th. They've got to be wiped out in self-defense. And now Dave is saying it's not self-defense. Of course it's self-defense. These people have done an October 7th, which was a despicable a genocidal activity, and they promised more of it. And self-defense is an essence of the libertarian theory. And Dave is trying to take away self-defense from Israel by saying that this isn't true, but this is true. They are launching, even now, they're launching rockets to Israel. They still have about 100 hostages. This is a criminal gang. And when the Israeli send out leaflets and say, move over here, Hamas won't let them move. And now what they have is safe zones. And guess what Hamas does? They go into the safe zones and start launching rockets again. And if Dave were in charge of Israel, if Dave were the prime minister of Israel and in charge of defending Israel, he would engage in suicide if he adheres to the principles that I hear him talking about now.
All right, so I'm going to stay out of it. You guys talk.
Well,
okay.
I mean, the principles I'm adhering to are Rothbardian principles, and yeah, that you're not allowed to kill innocent people. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward principle, and that doesn't mean you can't act in self-defense. And as you mentioned, there were the two just wars that Rothbard supported. So I guess I don't remember him writing that in For New Liberty, but I guess he did contradict himself there. But you know, a lot of the framing of this is, I think, just a little bit off. Like, so for example, look, Israel and at least a huge part of the reason why they have this beef with the Palestinians is because they've been occupying / dominating Gaza and the West Bank since 1967. And so if we're going to say that launching rockets is justification for all of them to, for Israel to do whatever it wants, I suppose, in response, well, like, what about the right of defense for the Palestinians? I mean, why wouldn't they also have a right to, Israel's launching a whole lot of rockets into Gaza, and you could say it's collateral damage. It's really something to hear Walter Block, of all people, use this government term of collateral damage. That doesn't seem to me to be consistent with a libertarian analysis of this, which, again, this is why I'm going back to these analogies where it's like, in you know what I'm saying? Like, short of direct self-defense, you don't just get to extrapolate self-defense and then claim it's a defensive action when you're killing a whole lot of innocent people, when you don't absolutely have to do that to protect yourself or other people. And so why is it that we just have to kind of grant this this different status to Israel, where they are, everything they do is self-defense? However, say the people of Gaza, who are under a total blockade since 2006 and were under a military occupation since 1967 before that, I would think they would have a right to self-defense as well. Another quick thing I just wanted to mention, because I didn't respond to this earlier, but when Walter makes a fair enough point with the boxers analogy, where the question isn't, is one guy good or bad? The question is how good they are in, relative to the other guy. I would just, to narrow that down even more, I think that what a libertarian would be concerned with is who's right in the conflict, not necessarily just who's better. So if there was a bar fight or something like that, and in a libertarian society, and a libertarian private cop came to figure out what happened, his concern would be who started it. Who's the aggressor here? And if you were to say, like, okay, this guy was the aggressor, but he's really great to his wife and his friends, and he's got a really nice house, and he treats her, you'd be like, yeah, and all of that is irrelevant. The question is, did he start the fight here? And likewise, I think you could certainly argue that the United States of America was a more libertarian society than Saddam Hussein's Iraq. But the question is, who was the aggressor in that fight? And so I think that whatever nice things there might be about Israel, and there certainly are some, I think that if we're judging this conflict, the question has to be, who is the aggressor in this conflict? And I don't think it's fair to say that because of October 7th, therefore the Palestinian people are the aggressors. The fact is that this conflict goes way back to before then, and I would argue that the Zionist settlers, and the Israeli government have been the aggressors in the conflict with the Palestinians.
Very well said. I couldn't agree with you more. Your point about the cop in the bar is excellent, exquisite. We don't care whether he's a nice guy or not. We care who started it. Who started it is crucial. So who started it? It wasn't the Jews. The Jews have been kicked out of every country you can name in Europe and elsewhere. Somehow the Jews got on the bad radar of a lot of people. The Arabs started it way before Israel, way before there was any land grabbing or any claim of that sort. In 1929 in Hebron, there was a pogrom. There were many, many pogroms in Israel and everywhere else. And the Jews don't start any of that stuff. The Jews are a bunch of nerds. They're the people of the book. They don't, we don't. I think Dave and I are both Jewish. So we're not noted for starting fights. And if anything, we're noted for running away. Except when Israel started, then all of a sudden we don't run away. But before that, we run away. The question is, who is more right? And now I'm glad that he brought up the question of land, because there are really two issues. One is, was any land stolen, and if so, from whom? Now, look, one of the basics of libertarianism is homesteading. The rightful owner of contested land is the one who was there first. If I homestead first and then Dave comes along and grabs my land, he started up. I was innocent. Well, who was there first? The Jews have been around, I don't know, 6 millennia, 5,700 years. They've been in the Israeli area for 4,000 years. When did the Muslims start? Only 1,400 years ago. The Muslims are Johnny-come-latelys, and I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it just that Muhammad didn't start in until the 6th century, whereas the Jews were there way, way before. Look, the Second Temple and the mosque, which is built above which? The Second Temple is below, and then the mosque is on top. This indicates that the Second Temple was there first. The Kohanim, the Cohens, Jews, were there first, and they built the first temple and then the second temple, and then they got kicked out by the Romans. The Jews were there first. They were the homesteaders of it. So, Michael, Dave is absolutely right. The question is, who started up? And the answer is, the Jews didn't start up. It was the Arabs that started up. No, they didn't start up on October 7th. Look, in 2005, what happened was that the Israeli government violated private property rights and kicked out all the Jews from Gaza. This was wrong. This is a violation of property rights, but they did it. And what they really wanted was for Gaza to be the Hong Kong of the Middle East. They would have helped them. And the Gazans got a lot of wealth and a lot of cement and a lot of metal. What did they do with the wealth and the cement and the metal? Did they build hotels? No. Did they build desalination plants? No. Did they build other civilian-type operations? No. Did they build roads? Yes, they built roads. They were underground, and they were used not to transport people, but to hide weapons and to use them as launching pads for suicide bombers. So I agree with Dave. Who started first is the crucial issue, but it was not the Jews. We didn't start up first. They started up first, and they have in their constitution that you got to kill all Jews. How can you bargain with people like that? Now, look, again, I return to this. Dave says part of libertarianism is you're not allowed to kill innocents. That's wrong. Even Dave and Tom agreed. Well, I don't know about Tom. He didn't say anything. But even Dave agreed that if they came in with people like that, it would be okay to kill innocents. So Dave contradicts himself. He says, on the one hand, you're not allowed to kill innocents. On the other hand, you are allowed to kill people if they do this. Now take abortion for a second. A 12-year-old girl is walking down the street. 12-year-old gets grabbed. 12-year-old girl gets raped. And now the 12-year-old girl is pregnant. There is a debate among libertarians as to what can happen. According to the pro-choice people, and Murray Rothbard is pro-choice, she can have an eviction. Well, when does life start? Well, in the Jewish tradition, life starts when you graduate medical school. That's a joke. Not very funny, but what the heck? Gotta lighten up things. Actually, it's when the heart beats, but that's a different issue. In my view, life starts with the fertilized egg. The sperm alone, the egg alone will create a human being. The fertilized egg is a young human being. And Murray Rothbard, and I'm a Rothbardian, Murray Rothbard says it's okay to kill that human being. So when Dave says that there's something wrong or anti-libertarian about killing innocent people, he's wrong on two grounds. Here's one ground, and the other ground is abortion, at least from the Rothbardian point of view. My own view on abortion is a little different. I don't want to get into it heavily, but let me just mention evictionism. And in my view, the proper view on abortion is evictionism. And you're always able to evict because you own the private property of your body, the woman. And it's unfortunate that in the first 6 months, if you evict, the baby will die. But in the last trimester, you're allowed to evict, but you're not allowed to kill. So again, we have another example where, according to libertarianism, it's okay to kill innocents. It's not only okay, but it's legal. And libertarianism is a theory of what should the law be. And the law should be, yes, you're allowed to kill innocents sometimes. And there's nothing wrong with the concept of collateral damage. We have to describe in some way the killing of innocent people that are subjugated by Hamas. If you have a better word than collateral damage, that I'll adopt it. But in the absence of any better word, it's better than genocide. It's better than purposefully killing innocent people, which is what Hamas does.
Hey, everybody, is the free market really going to be able to solve the problems posed by some of these terrible big tech companies? Well, as a matter of fact, it's already happening thanks to Federated Computer. Increasingly, Google, Microsoft, Apple, Zoom, you name it, they think your private data is their playground for their advertising networks and AI systems. Well, one way you can avoid all those things is just not using the quote-unquote free tools that big tech wants you to use. Federated Computer, on the other hand, offers a full replacement for Google, Microsoft Office 365, Slack, Zoom, all the tools of big tech, but designed for people who care about privacy, don't want to be treated like cattle, and want a great price. Everything's encrypted end-to-end, fully backed up daily. We're talking about private email, file storage, group chat, WordPress, all the applications your team or your business needs, all bundled into one easy monthly subscription that's 10 times less expensive than big tech offerings. You get unlimited users, fantastic personal customer support from real human beings, and the assurance that your data is your data and not big tech's. Well, visit www.federated.computer for your free 30-day trial and use coupon code WOODS for 10% off your first 6 months. So how about that? A company that thinks its job is to, provide you with services for a great price instead of spying on you or shutting you up or manipulating you. Take your first step with other happy Woods listeners towards digital freedom. Visit www.federated.computer today for your free 30-day trial and use coupon code WOODS for 10% off your first 6 months.
Okay. So first of all, you can just make a correction. You're right about that. So you can't kill innocent people if it's not in immediate self-defense, and so something like that. You're right. And I disagree with Rothbard on being pro-choice. So that's a whole separate debate that we don't need to have right now. Look, the claim that this kind of almost supernatural property rights claim because the Jews were there first, whatever exactly that means or whatever exactly the truth of that is. A mutual friend, I believe, of the three of, or the two of you, I don't actually really know him, but Sheldon Richmond wrote a fantastic book called Coming to Palestine. It was published by the Libertarian Institute. I highly recommend people read it, in which he has David Ben-Gurion's quote about how he really thought that basically what happened was all the Romans didn't really kick out all the Jews. They basically ended up converting to Islam. So I don't even know if it's correct, but regardless of that, this is just, this is like saying that I could go, because I have Jewish DNA, I can go kick someone in the West Bank out of their house right now because I could say my people were here way before your people were here. This is not the way that libertarians ever conceptualize of property rights. And the truth is that the Palestinians who were living in Palestine, who had been there for hundreds of years, and were in houses that they themselves had built or their grandfathers or fathers had built. And the fact that they got kicked out of those homes, many of them still have land, the older ones still have land deeds, still have keys to those old homes. That's just indefensible from a libertarian position. They had the homesteading rights of that. And nobody can say, oh, but I was here thousands of years ago or something like that. Therefore, I have the right to kick you out of your house and not let you back into it. I just don't see how any libertarian can. If that were the logic we were to go off of, I don't know where it would lead to. But I've taken my DNA test. I think maybe I could go back to like Austria or Ukraine or something like that and just kick some people there out of their homes. If I was there genetically, my line was there before theirs was. So I don't think that. I don't think that makes sense. I also think that. As I guess kind of the point I was getting at the beginning of this, where I was saying like, oh, Israel are the bad guys here. And libertarians, like, we don't like governments. We look at all of them as criminal organizations. But then, and I understand you could say theoretically, I don't think it applies in this situation, but you could say, well, relative to this other government, this government's much better. But I don't think any of this would require us to like swallow the government propaganda in this way, Walter, and say, all Israel wanted was for Gaza to become the new Singapore. They just wanted Gaza to, Israel was, Ben Swan, who's a great journalist, just had a piece up on this today. Israel was for years facilitating cash payments directly to Hamas to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, some estimated at over $1 billion, with the explicitly stated goal of keeping Hamas in power in Gaza so that it would divide the Palestinians and it would thwart the creation of a Palestinian state. I mean, like, not only Netanyahu, but senior members in his war cabinet, his advisors, his opposition parties, they have all explicitly said this in their own words, that was the goal, was to keep Hamas in power, keep the radical Islamists in power. Therefore, you never have to deal with these people. Therefore, you never have to have pressure from liberal Jews within Israel who don't want to be occupiers. And you don't get pressure from the international community because you can say, look, they're a bunch of terrorists. And this way, we never have to give them their independence. We never have to give them their own state. This is... To sum that up is like, oh man, it's just these Jews who we always run away from fights. We never pick fights, and we just wanted you guys to be prosperous and happy. If Israel actually wanted Gaza to be prosperous and happy, they would have ended the blockade a long time ago. They would have ended the occupation many years, many decades ago. And same with the West Bank. That's not the goal. They want the land. And they explicitly say this in their own words. Netanyahu showed up to the UN with a map of greater Israel that included the West Bank and Gaza. They call it Judea and Samaria, and they're still building up settlements in the West Bank to this day, which is totally in violation of international law. And almost, I'd say about 80% of the Zionists even are opposed to it. But they're still building up settlements in the West Bank and mistreating the Palestinians. I just don't like I'm not one of these guys. And I think if you look at any of my debates on this, I'm not one of these guys who just tells like a one-sided history where at every single turn Israel was wrong and the Arabs were always right, and every act of Arab violence was just done in self-defense, or it was just because they had to. I'm not that. The Arabs, there have been terrorists amongst the Arabs. They've embraced terrorism a long time ago. It was an awful decision for them. It was also an awful decision just morally speaking. But I think that this is it's a somewhat it's like a funhouse mirror version of history to act like Israel has never aggressed against the Palestinians. They really had no right to the country to begin with. The project of creating the nation was, when put into plan, resulted in hundreds of thousands of Palestinians being kicked out of their homes and never allowed to return. And they've been dominating Gaza and the West Bank ever since. Essentially, this is all indefensible from any type of libertarian position.
Israel has never aggressed. Of course, that's not true. The latest thing, and I don't know if it's true or not, is that 8 or 10 Israeli soldiers or jailers raped a Palestinian man in a prison. I don't know if it's true or not. But what is the Israeli government reaction to that? It's to have a survey to find out if it's true or not. And if it's true, they are going to punish the people that did that. Contrast that to the rapists on the other side. When October 7th occurred, there were many rapes. What was the attitude of Hamas toward the soldiers of Hamas that raped Israeli women and girls? It was not to find out if it was true or not and then to punish them. It was rather to give them a pension and an award. You get a merit badge for raping Israeli women. This is civilization versus non-civilization. Now look, Israel is not perfect. To the extent that what you say is true, that Israel supported Hamas, they made a mistake. They screwed up. I'm not saying that Israel is perfect. I'm just saying that they are better. A more libertarian. That's the issue. Resolve that libertarians should support Israel, not Hamas. I think that was the wording of the debate we're having. And my claim is that it's not even close. Let's the Sheldon Richman book. I don't know how many footnotes my colleague and I, David Fudeman, have in our book. Maybe 500 footnotes, 300. I don't know. You know how many footnotes Sheldon Richman had? 0. How can you write a book with no footnotes, with no defense of what you're saying? I mean, It was a pamphlet. It wasn't a book. And people who rely... Now, look, Sheldon Richman is a great libertarian. Sheldon Richman is a friend of mine. I think he's a friend of mine. I don't know. Nowadays, I have to be careful. I was friends with Hans Hoppe and Dave and Tom DiLorenzo for, 40, 50 years. And all of a sudden, I'm not friends with them. So I might not be friends with Sheldon. Let me just put it this way. I'm still friends with them. They're not friends with me. Sheldon Richman's book is, he should have put in some footnotes to defend what he was saying. One of the points that Hans Hoppe made against me is that I was a collectivist. And Dave is now talking about this, that just because he has some Jewish DNA doesn't mean he can go over here and there. And Hans was insistent that property rights are only individual. Hans is wrong. Look, right now, if you take a plane from Florida, where Tom is, to Seattle, which is, 3,500 miles, east of the Mississippi, you'll see a few lights. West of the Mississippi, except for Denver and Las Vegas, there's nobody there. The place is empty until you get to the coast. And there are 360 million people. And the place is empty. How many Indians were there when the Europeans first came? The best estimate is from 3 to 5 million. 3 to 5 million, if 360 million can't fill up the place, homesteading it and all, 3 to 5 million native persons, Indians, can't do it either. So we can't accept the argument that the Indians own the whole place, because there weren't enough of them to come anywhere near to homestead. And they own 1 or 2% of it, whatever. To say that they own nothing is, this is Hans' position, and this is the position of people who attack me for collectivism. To say that the Indians own nothing is preposterous. Why do you say they own nothing? Because they didn't homestead it individually. They homesteaded it as a tribe. So, again, Dave, if you go over to wherever it was, Ukraine or Russia, where you had parents, and I had parents over there too, it would be problematic to tell some people to get out. But this is just a way of attacking collectivism. There's nothing wrong with collectivism in property rights, because some people own property collectively. And Hans is wrong, and you're wrong when you think that only individuals can own property. So the question is, who has a better title to land, you with your Jewish DNA, or some Arab who got there way after your great-great-parents were there? And I think you have a better shot at it. Now let's talk about 1948. In 1948, about 1 million, I think it was around 900,000, let's call it 1 million for round numbers, about 1 million Palestinians left the area. Some of them left, they just wanted to go on vacation. Who knows? Some of them left because they figured there's going to be war, and then for safety's sake, they wanted to get out. Another group of them, and I don't know the proportions, I don't know that it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Another group of them got messages from the 5 invading armies. Syria, Egypt, Lebanon, Iraq, all the armies around Israel. And the message was, look, Palestinians, get out. Go. Because if you're there, it's going to be harder for us to slaughter all the Jews. It's going to be hard to distinguish between you and them. But if you get out, there'll only be Jews left, and we'll just slaughter them, and you come back in 2 weeks, and we'll go on from there. Well, what happened is 2 weeks later, the Jews didn't want them back. They regarded them as traitors. At exactly the same time, in 1947 and 1948, almost exactly the same number of people, Jews in Egypt, in Syria, in Lebanon, were also kicked out. Nobody talks about them. Nobody talks about them. Everyone says, well, the Jews kicked out the Palestinians and they should let them all back. Nobody talks about the Jews. Now, a rough justice, not a libertarian justice, but a rough justice would have been, okay, all the Jews that were kicked out of Egypt, the Palestinians that were kicked out of Israel, go take those properties. And the Jews that were kicked out of Egypt, go take the property of the Arabs that were kicked out of Israel. Nothing like that happened. Instead, Israel integrated all these Jews that were kicked out of the Arab countries. And what the Arabs did is they wouldn't integrate those people. They kept them in concentration camps. Well, I shouldn't say that. They kept them in camps. to show the perfidy and the evil of the Jews. This is highly problematic. There is a phrase called an open-air prison. It's called Hamas is an open-air prison. Yes, Hamas is an open-air prison. Gaza. Gaza is an open-air prison. Why is Gaza an open-air prison? Why do they have the blockade? Because they keep sending in rockets. The Jews don't send in rockets first. The Palestinians keep sending in rockets. They keep sending in suicide bombers. So of course Israel is going to try to defend itself. Now you talk about the two-state solution. Israel is offering the Palestinians two-state solution until the cows come home. Oslo here, there, and the Palestinian Authority keeps rejecting it. There was nothing wrong with a two-state solution in the Israeli eyes. In many occasions, they were offered that, but they rejected it because they wanted the whole thing. And as Dave said that, what was it? That they have no right to Israel in 48. Dave said they had no right. Look, Murray Rothbard, in his 1967 article, even Murray agreed that Israel had a title to 7% of the land that they thought they should have. 7%, it's not a lot, but, well, the libertarian view on statism and states is that we should each have one. From the anarcho-capitalist point of view, there should be 8 billion governments. We should each be sovereign. You want to ask a girl out for a date, you can't ask her for a date. You have to get your foreign minister to ask our foreign minister. I'm kidding about that. But the point is we should have a government for everybody. Okay, a government for everybody. Well, now you have 7% of the land and you have a bunch of Jews there. And suppose that they had set up that land in Israel in 1948. What would have happened? What would have happened is the same thing that actually happened, namely 5 or 7 Arab countries would have come in and tried to kick Israeli butt. And the Israelis, who are a more modern society, would have beat them all down. Now let's talk about the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights came into Israeli possession at the end of a war that was started by the Arabs. Are you entitled to take over other people's property? Yes. Look, suppose Canada declares war on the United States, and at the end of the war, the U.S. is occupying Ontario, one of the provinces. Should the U.S. be entitled to take it over on libertarian grounds? Yes, because when you start an unjust war, and let's stipulate that the Canadians were unjust, and the U.S. takes over and they occupy territory, of course they should have. At the end of, I forget which war it was, the 67 war, I get it all mixed up, the Israelis occupied the Sinai Peninsula. They should have kept it. Eisenhower made them give it up. They should have kept it because they were attacked, and at the end of the war, they owned that land. And it's the same thing with Gaza and Judea and Samaria, sometimes called the West Bank. The Israelis won that fair and square in a war. And not only are they justified in taking it over because of the war, they're also justified taking it over because of historical purposes. I don't call it settlements. I don't call them colonialists. The colonialists are the people who come afterward. The Jews were there first. They're not colonialists.
Okay. I don't even know where to start with this because that was quite a lot. I guess let's go to 48, or I should say 47 into 48. So from the libertarian perspective, and you can make the argument that I think, right, it was in War Guilt in the Middle East that Rothbard says they had about 7% of the land ownership or something like that. And you could say, okay, they had a right to start something, some type of, whatever, anarchist, consistent, governance with, that the 7% that they own. And if they had done that, what would have happened? All of this is kind of impossible to know. But the reality is that the United Nations General Assembly made a partition recommendation, which they have no authority. They have no authority under their own charter to just divvy up countries in the General Assembly and decide where exactly the land will be partitioned. But certainly from the libertarian perspective, that is essentially worthless. It should be as worthless as as any of these, like any proclamation from some global governance group, especially with the fact that there was nobody who voted for the partition recommendation who was anywhere close to the region. It was basically a bunch of European powers decided that this is how we're going to carve up this new territory. And so I don't think that granted any legitimacy for the Zionist settlers at the time to then just start creating this state because the UN had said that they were allowed to. And I think libertarians should view things like the Balfour Declaration and stuff like that in the same manner. This was never these imperialist powers to give, much like the Palestinian state is not Israel's to give. They shouldn't be the ones deciding whether or not Gaza gets to rule themselves or the West Bank gets to rule themselves. But in 1948, you have what started, it started in 47 as a civil war. This is what the UN intervention kind of directly led to. And there were street clashes. And if you want to make the argument that the Arabs started that war, I think the problem that you deal with is that you are really getting into collectivism at this point, because this isn't even separate nations at this point. There is no nation state there. The British mandate is coming to an end, and you have clashes between different people who are, in effect, citizens. I mean, I guess not technically citizens, but different people who live within this one jurisdiction. But what ends up happening in this, right? And I do kind of agree with you. It's a little bit messy. We don't know of I've heard estimates between 750 to 900,000 Palestinians who end up leaving. But there certainly were atrocities that were committed in Deir Yassin and other villages that played a large part in why a lot of people were fleeing. A lot of them, and of course, rumors about what had happened and then exaggerations about what had happened started spreading quickly. A lot of people took off because they feared for their lives. A lot of people took off because they thought a big war was about to break out, and so they wanted to get out of there. Regardless of any of that, or even if some of them left voluntarily because they wanted to wait till the end of the war, and we don't know exactly what numbers any of these are. It really doesn't matter. From the libertarian perspective, they still had no right to not let them back into their property. They had homesteaded it. They have rights. If a fight breaks out and I grab my wife and kids and run with my family, that doesn't mean I've forfeited my house. Like, I'd still, by libertarian theory of property rights, I'd still own it and would still have the right to come back to it. And that doesn't magically change because a new government had been set up. Now, in the beginning of what you were saying there, and this is kind of, like, we could go through all of this history. I've done this in a lot of the debates that I've been in. I've read a lot of books about this stuff, and I really disagree with your characterizations of just about all of this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to respond to every single thing, but I would say that when I mentioned earlier that that Netanyahu had been propping up Hamas for many years, and you said, okay, well, that's a mistake. And then just kind of moved it to the side. But the point I was making is that, no, this kind of gets to something that's much bigger than just a mistake. And in fact, perhaps it wasn't a mistake. Perhaps from Benjamin Netanyahu's perspective, it worked. I mean, it did work to thwart the creation of a Palestinian state. The peace process has been over this whole time. It is not ongoing anymore, even though Israel had committed in the past to a process to eventually give the Palestinians a state. And Hamas being in power in Gaza was a major factor in that. And the point I was making was a deeper one. It was refuting your idea that all Israel wanted was what's best for the Palestinians. And there are just this group of good Jewish boys who are like, hey, we all just want to get along and live our lives. That's not what's really going on here. And I think that, this is what's truly bizarre to me about that, like the idea that I have to convince Walter Block that governments are not, in fact, benevolent actors who really just want what's best for the people underneath them. That's not what's going on here. What's going on here is that you have one group of people. Look, if you want to zoom out and do the whole history as you did, but I'll just kind of in broad strokes here. But listen, the Jews did get their asses kicked all throughout Europe. There's no denying that. From pogroms all the way to the rise of the Nazis, Europe was a very bad place for the Jews, at least when there were these outbursts of Jew hatred. And if you read the original Zionist writers, this is what they talked about, that they were like, listen, we can't live in Europe. We can't peacefully coexist with these people. But they were quite fond of the Arabs and quite fond of the Ottoman Empire. And they felt like they had always treated them much better in comparison. And so you had a movement of Eastern European, mostly atheists, were the original Zionists, who did something pretty incredible. They did something pretty incredible. They literally decided they wanted to start a country in an area that they had never been, based around a language that none of them spoke, which is really pretty wild if you think about it. That's quite a thing to pull off. And they did it. They got the international financing, they put it together, they worked very hard, and they made it happen. However, as this culminated, it also resulted in 750,000 people getting kicked off of their property and never allowed back. And then when the wars with other Arab countries broke out, and now I'm fast forwarding through a few wars to 67, then they took control of Gaza and the West Bank, where 5 million people live. And they've had control of it ever since. And you can cherry pick this history away and say, like, it was always the Arabs who were the bad guys and it was always the Jews who were the good guys. But that fundamental reality is something you can't get away from. And this is going to produce a situation where there is resistance, where there is hatred, and where there are people attempting to fight back. And why on earth any libertarian would look at this situation and say, you know what my takeaway from this is here? Not the 50 things that are completely consistent with libertarianism, like America should not be funding Israel anymore. That the most basic line that you could just come out here and say, by the way, that changes the entire dynamics of the region. Israel could not be conducting the war in Gaza the way it is right now without help, but without American intelligence and munitions, let alone talking about a wider conflict with Hezbollah and the Houthis and Iran. This changes everything. You could easily just say, okay, the libertarian position is that our people should not be forced to fund Israel. The libertarian position is that you can't indiscriminately kill innocent people. The libertarian position is that you can't have a full blockade around a tiny geographic area for decades and decades and decades. These are obvious. But instead, to have libertarians arguing that basically through all of this government of Israel, this government, which, by the way, in 1948, to go back to it, was essentially, I mean, like, as three Rothbardians here, we all know what the essence of government is, right? It's the monopoly on violence. Well, what was the Israeli government that immediately formed in 1948? It was 3 terrorist organizations, in the Stern Gang and the Lehi and the Haganah. They all formed together and made the IDF. The people who had just 5 minutes earlier been committing acts of terrorism expressly with the purpose of driving out an occupying force. That's what the Jews were, not the ones who ran away from every single fight in Europe. That wasn't who the Jews in Israel were. And the point is that Jews did do a lot of running away throughout history, and that stopped. That stopped with Zionism. And then they became the aggressors. They became, it's like the old hurt people type thing. They were abused as kids, and then they grew up to be like, hey, we're going to take it out on these people. But I'm sorry, it's just not accurate to say that these groups, the Stern Gang, were like, what? They were just a rights protection agency or something like that. So I'm just saying that the history is actually much more complex and nuanced, with a whole lot of evil stuff done on both sides. At this point, I think it's reasonable to say Israel has to stop. They cannot continue slaughtering innocent people in Gaza. They cannot continue occupying people in perpetuity. And at the very least, we could say our tax dollars should stop supporting that.
I figure that the debate would be about an hour. We're already over an hour. I think that I've spoken more time, although I haven't kept track. So I'd like to end now, and I'll try to be more brief. I have to go teach, sir, so I got to get off. But if Dave wants to continue and Tom will put up with us again, we can have part 2 of this. But so let me just say a few words. I want to compliment Dave again. Not once did he use any, what shall I say, nasty words. He didn't call me bloodthirsty, unhinged, or maniac like I've been called by Hans and Tom. So I appreciate that, and I hope that I've been civil also.
By the way, not me, Tom, just so you know.
Tom D. Lorenzo.
All right,
Not Tom Woods, Tom D. Lorenzo.
Have nothing to do with this. All right.
I agree with Dave. The U.S. should not be supporting Israel. The U.S. should not be supporting anyone except Israel. That was a Freudian slip. Except the U.S. sorry. I caught myself quickly. Look, the U.S. government should disband from the Ba'ath Party point of view. But if we're in the classical liberal terrain, then the U.S. should not have any foreign aid for anyone. And I think that would help Israel. If the U.S. keeps being a fair weather friend of Israel, Biden keeps saying, well, don't be too rough on the Arabs. If it were not for the U.S., Israel would now own the, what do you call it? What's that place to the west of Israel, East Egypt?
The Sinai?
The Sinai Peninsula, thanks. So I agree with that. The U.S. blockade will stop as soon as the rockets stop, and as soon as Hamas renounces their convention that they should kill all Jews. And again, it's okay to kill innocents on occasion if that's the only way you can engage in self-defense. Dave says that it's shocking that I, as a Rothbardian, was saying that the government is benevolent. Some governments are more benevolent than others. None of them should exist. The Israeli government should disband, and it should be an anarcho-capitalist society. But I don't think that Israel is perfect, and I'm very critical of Israel. I think Israel is way too soft. Yes, the Lehi, the Stern, and the Erdogan engage in excesses, but without them, there'd be no Israel. That's the way the IDF pretty much formed, on the basis of those three and a few others. Dave, again, waxes eloquent about the right of return of the Palestinians, but what about the right of return of the Jews that were kicked out of Egypt and Syria? He doesn't mention that. They can't return, because if they return, they get killed. Whereas in Israel, there are Arabs who are on the Supreme Court, there are Arabs who are judges, Arabs who are professors, Arabs who are, they say that it's like South Africa apartheid. That's nonsense. Well, look, I hope I was more brief, and I hope that the time was more accurate. I got to get off. I got to go teach. But I thank you, Dave, and I thank you, Tom. This was a wonderful experience, and I've learned a bit from Dave, and I hope he's learned a bit from me. And again, if you two guys want to do this again, I'd be happy to do it. So maybe, Tom, do you want to have the last few words?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think given that we did let you go second when normally you would go first, so I would like Dave to have the last word, but I know you have to run, so I might let him talk for a couple of minutes after you've gone, but I promise that won't be when all the names get called or whatever.
That would be funny.
I would like him to have a final word. Now I just start
doing it.
But Tom, he went first.
He did go first, but at the same time, he was supposed to go second, given the normal debate rules. And you have talked a lot more. You have talked a lot more. I just want him to have 2 minutes.
Dave, go get him.
Okay. So listen, I would just conclude this, and thank you, Walter, and thank you, Tom, for hosting. I would conclude with my point about acting as if the government of Israel is benevolent. It's not just a matter of compare to who. I'm also just looking at this in absolutes. Like, even if the United States of America were, say, preferable to some other government, we still wouldn't describe the people in the agriculture department as just really wanting to help the agriculture industry, or we wouldn't describe anyone in the Department of Education as just people who are really motivated by wanting kids to learn. Because it's not just that we're anarcho-capitalists. We're not David Friedman anarcho-capitalists. We're Rothbardians. We recognize these people as the evil criminals that they are. And so even if we're comparing one criminal gang to another criminal gang, we should never be treating one as if we can take them at their word, or if they're somehow motivated by this desire to improve humanity. These are blood-soaked parasitic monsters. All of them, the Israeli government and Hamas too. And so I just think that that's a better framework for libertarians to view all government action. And when you view things that way, it leads to you always being skeptical of government propaganda. And that's a really good prior to have, because you're almost always going to be right. If you're always skeptical, if your baseline assumption, if you've learned one thing from the thousands of episodes of the Tom Woods Show, I would say it's that if your baseline assumption is that the people in charge of government are SOBs trying to screw us all over for their own benefit, you're going to be right 99.9% of the time. Israel is no exception to that. I'm glad we ended it on the note of agreement that America should not be involved in this conflict at all, and certainly shouldn't be financing it. I think that, the stuff you said about Joe Biden, this is a political dilemma. Joe Biden has never wavered on giving Israel unconditional support. He's said a few things because a lot of his voters are real upset that they're seeing so many dead babies every day. I also think from any decent libertarian position, however you feel about this conflict, it should be heartbreaking to all of us to see the images that we've seen over the last almost year now in Gaza. I mean, whether you're a libertarian or a Christian or just a decent person, all of us should be rooting for this to end and not kind of cheering it on and hoping that there's more innocent people who die. So anyway, I'll end on that. Thanks to both of you guys. I enjoyed it.
All right. Well, so I'm going to have links to both of these gentlemen at tomwoods.com/2538. My thanks to both of them, to everybody who watched or listened. Come join me for the best vacation you've ever had at tomwoodscruise.com, and we'll see you next time.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com, and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.